The universe broke. Not metaphorically, not poetically. It tore open above the Atlantic like black glass splitting under pressure, spilling white fire across the storm clouds. Superman fell through the wound between worlds. One moment he had been fighting to hold the line against forces that wanted to swallow entire realities. The next, he was alone, tumbling through rain and thunder toward a dark ocean that did not know his name. He stopped himself 300 feet above the water. For a few seconds, Clark Kent simply hovered there, cape snapping behind him, rain striking his face, listening to the unfamiliar heartbeat of a familiar Earth. New York was ahead of him. The skyline was the same shape. The bridges were where they should have been. The rivers cut through the city like dark veins. But something in the air felt wrong. Not empty, wounded. Clark rose into the clouds and let his hearing open. The city came alive all at once. Traffic, sirens, arguments, laughter, crying babies, televisions behind apartment walls, radios in police cruisers, elevators humming in glass towers. Then he heard the heroes, or what this world called heroes. A rescue in Brooklyn was being discussed by executives before the smoke had cleared. Not the survivors, not the injured, the camera angles. A train accident in Queens had left civilians dead. The urgent question was not who failed them, but how quickly witnesses could be silenced. Another voice mentioned licensing rights. Another mentioned approval ratings. Another laughed about collateral damage as if human beings were broken furniture. Clark opened his eyes. Across Manhattan, one tower dominated the skyline. Vought. The name burned through the rain in cold corporate light. He stared at it, and for the first time since arriving, he understood the rot he had felt in the air. This world had not lost its heroes. It had sold them. A scream cut through the city. Clark turned instantly. A bus had lost control on a rain-slicked avenue below. Its tires screamed across the pavement as it slid toward a crowded crosswalk. People scattered. A man slipped. A child froze. The bus stopped 1 foot from the sidewalk. No explosion, no speech, no grand entrance. Just 2 hands on the front bumper and a red cape vanishing into the rain. Inside the bus, a little girl pressed her face to the window. She saw him for less than a second. Superman smiled at her. Then he was gone. High above the city, Homelander had seen everything. He stood behind the glass wall of his penthouse, perfectly still, his reflection smiling back at him with practiced perfection. The stranger had flown through his sky, stopped a disaster in his city, and left without waiting to be seen. That was the part Homelander hated most. Not the strength, not the speed, not even the cape. The indifference to applause. No one did that. No one powerful. No one real. Homelander's eyes narrowed as the stranger landed on a rooftop in Queens. Empty, isolated, waiting. A slow smile spread across his face. Fine. If the man wanted privacy, Homelander would give him privacy. Thunder rolled over Queens as Clark stood on the rooftop, rain pooling around his boots. He did not turn when he heard the sonic boom behind him. Homelander landed softly. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Homelander smiled. "You're a long way from home." Clark turned. He saw the flag cape first, the golden hair, the perfect jaw, the manufactured smile. Then he saw what was underneath. Power without peace. A child's hunger wearing a god's costume. "Maybe," Clark said. Homelander tilted his head. "You know who I am?" "Yes." "Good." The smile faded. "Then you understand how this works." Clark waited. "This city has rules," Homelander said. "Vought has rules. I have rules." He took a step closer. "And strangers don't get to fly around my sky." Clark looked past him, toward the millions of lights stretching across the city. "It isn't your sky." Something sharp moved behind Homelander's eyes. Clark continued, calm and steady. "And it isn't mine either." The rain fell harder. Homelander's eyes began to glow red. "You should leave." I can't. You really, really should. Clark's voice softened. There are people here who need help. For one strange second, Homelander looked almost confused. Then the confusion became rage. Crimson heat exploded from his eyes. The beam struck Superman square in the chest, bright enough to turn the rain into steam and the rooftop into a furnace. Concrete cracked. Metal vents warped. The air screamed. Clark did not move. Homelander pushed harder, pouring every ounce of fury into the attack. Still, Superman did not move. When the light finally died, silence returned with the rain. Clark looked down at his chest. There was not a mark. Then he looked back at Homelander. No anger, no pride, no threat, only sadness. And that was the moment Homelander felt something he had never truly felt before: fear. The feeling settled into Homelander's chest like poison. For a moment, neither man moved. Rain tapped against the rooftop. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the city skyline. Homelander stared at Superman, waiting for the illusion to break. There had to be a trick, some hidden ability, some explanation that would restore the natural order of things. Instead, Clark simply stood there, calm, patient, almost sympathetic. Homelander hated that more than he could put into words. "Who are you?" he asked. "My name is Clark." "That's not what I mean." Clark nodded slightly. "Most people call me Superman." The name should have sounded absurd, yet somehow it didn't. Homelander folded his arms. "You stop buses. You fly. You're bulletproof." "So are you." The answer caught him off guard. Nobody ever compared him to anyone else, especially not as an equal. "We are not the same." Clark studied him quietly. "No," he said, "we're not." Something about the response made Homelander's stomach tighten. For the first time in years, he felt like someone was seeing through him. Not the public image, not the costume, not the brand. Him. The sensation was deeply uncomfortable. Before he could respond, Clark suddenly tilted his head. His attention shifted somewhere far beyond the rooftop. Homelander noticed immediately. "What is it?" Clark didn't answer. His hearing stretched across the city. A gas main had exploded beneath an apartment building in Brooklyn. Walls were collapsing. People were trapped. Several children were still inside. Clark looked back at Homelander. "I'm sorry." "Sorry for what?" "I have to go." The words barely left his mouth before he vanished. The sonic boom shook puddles across the rooftop. Homelander stood alone. Again, his jaw clenched. The stranger had just walked away. Not because he was afraid, not because he had won, because someone else needed help. Homelander looked toward Brooklyn. For a second, he considered following. Then he immediately hated himself for considering it. Across the city, Superman arrived in less than a heartbeat. Smoke poured from shattered windows. Fire crews hadn't reached the scene yet. Residents crowded the street below, screaming names into the darkness. Clark moved without hesitation. His vision pierced the debris. 3 people trapped on the 4th floor. 2 more beneath a collapsed stairwell. A child hiding in a bathroom. He entered through the smoke. Minutes passed. Then survivors began emerging. A frightened mother, an elderly man, a teenage boy covered in dust. One after another, alive, safe. A little girl clung to Clark's neck as he carried her outside. "Are you an angel?" she asked. Clark smiled. "No." The girl looked confused. "You sure?" A few nearby firefighters laughed. For the first time all night, the tension broke. Clark set her gently on the ground. Her mother rushed forward and wrapped her in a desperate embrace. The relief on their faces reminded him why he never stopped. No matter the world, no matter the universe, people mattered. One life mattered. Across the street, a black SUV sat quietly among a line of parked cars. Billy Butcher lowered a pair of binoculars. Inside the vehicle, Huey watched the rescue unfold through the windshield. Neither man spoke for several seconds. Finally, Huey shook his head. "That's the 4th one this week." Butcher grunted. Yeah. No cameras. Yeah. No sponsorships. Yeah. No Vought team. Butcher frowned. That part bothered him most. Every soup he had ever met wanted something. Money, fame, power, control. They always wanted something. Yet this one kept saving people and disappearing, as if the rescue itself was the reward. Billy Butcher lowered the binoculars. Now that's interesting. Billy Butcher did not believe in heroes. He believed in public relations departments. He believed in cover-ups. He believed in lies packaged as inspiration and sold to the highest bidder. Most of all, he believed that every soup eventually showed their true face. The trick was staying alive long enough to see it. For 4 days he had watched Superman. 4 days of rescues. 4 days of disappearing before reporters arrived. 4 days of behavior that made absolutely no sense. It was beginning to irritate him. The black SUV rolled through the streets of Manhattan shortly after midnight. Frenchie sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through surveillance reports. Huey occupied the back seat. Kimiko stared out the window. Nobody spoke. Eventually, Huey broke the silence. Maybe he's exactly what he looks like. Butcher snorted. And what would that be? A good guy. The response earned a laugh. Not a friendly laugh. The kind reserved for ideas that sounded ridiculous. Huey folded his arms. I'm serious. That's your problem. Butcher pulled the vehicle to the curb. There are no good superheroes. You don't know that. I absolutely know that. The certainty in his voice ended the discussion, at least for the moment. Several blocks away, Superman stood atop a construction crane overlooking the city. The night had finally cleared. For the first time since arriving, he could see the stars. Different universe. Same stars. The thought brought a brief smile to his face. Then he heard it, a conversation. 43 stories above ground inside Vought Tower. 2 executives, 1 scientist, 1 lawyer. The words were quiet, but to Superman they sounded as clear as if the speakers were standing beside him. Compound 5 inventory. Transport scheduled tomorrow. If Homelander finds out. Clark's expression changed. Again. Compound V. Every trail seemed to lead back to those 2 words. He focused harder, listening, following, connecting fragments. Over the past several days, he had assembled pieces of a puzzle. Human experimentation, corporate secrecy, government contracts, children. The mention of children troubled him most. Whatever Compound V was, it wasn't simply a product. People had suffered because of it, perhaps millions. Far below, another voice suddenly interrupted his concentration. A mugging. 3 blocks south. Clark vanished. The criminals never understood what happened. 1 second they were threatening a terrified college student. The next their weapons were gone. The ammunition sat neatly stacked beside a nearby mailbox. The young woman blinked in confusion. By the time she looked around, Superman had already disappeared. No speech, no dramatic entrance, no demand for gratitude, just help. Minutes later, Clark landed atop a quiet office building. A voice greeted him from the shadows. That's becoming a habit. Clark turned. Billy Butcher stepped into the moonlight. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Butcher studied him carefully. This was the first time they had met face to face. Superman looked exactly the same up close. No arrogance, no superiority, no need to intimidate. It was unsettling. You've been following me, Clark said. Butcher raised an eyebrow. That obvious? You parked across the street from 3 different rescues. Fair enough. Clark almost smiled. Almost. Butcher folded his arms. I'll save us both some time. All right. I don't trust you. The honesty surprised Clark. Most people would have hidden it. You don't trust many people. No. But you're here. That earned a small grin. Smart, too. The grin faded. Tell me what you want. Clark looked toward the distant Vought Tower. The truth. For the first time, Butcher's expression became serious. What truth? Compound 5. The reaction was immediate. Every trace of humor disappeared. Now they were discussing something real, something dangerous. Butcher studied him for a long moment, trying to decide, trying to find the lie, trying and failing. Finally, he exhaled. If you're asking about Compound V, mate, his eyes drifted toward the glowing Vought logo dominating the skyline. Then you've just made some very powerful enemies. The conversation lingered in Billy Butcher's mind long after Superman disappeared. That alone irritated him. Normally, people were easy. Everyone wanted something. Money, power, fame, revenge. Find the motivation, and you found the person. But Clark Kent didn't fit. The man had the power to level cities and yet spent his nights pulling strangers out of burning buildings. It wasn't natural, at least not in Butcher's experience. The following afternoon, Vought Tower was in full crisis mode. Executives crowded a secure conference room high above Manhattan. Large screens displayed footage gathered from dozens of encounters involving the mysterious newcomer. Every clip ended the same way. Lives saved, crimes stopped, disasters prevented. Then he vanished. No interviews, no sponsorships, no media appearances, no contracts. The room's frustration grew with every passing minute. Madeline Stillwell sat at the head of the table. What do we actually know? A nervous analyst cleared his throat. Almost nothing. Stillwell's expression hardened. Explain. We can't find a connection to Compound 5. Several executives exchanged uneasy looks. The analyst continued. No financial records, no known relatives, no documented history, no social media presence, no educational records. One executive laughed nervously. That's impossible. The analyst nodded. I agree, but that's where we are. Stillwell stared at the glowing image of Superman displayed on the screen. For the first time in years, Vought faced something it couldn't classify. And things that couldn't be classified were dangerous. Meanwhile, several miles away, Clark sat alone on the edge of a skyscraper overlooking the city. The sunset painted the clouds orange and gold. For a few moments, he allowed himself to simply watch. The city looked peaceful from up here, but appearances could be deceiving. His hearing expanded once again. Thousands of conversations flowed through the air. Most were ordinary. Families preparing dinner, children finishing homework, couples arguing, friends laughing. Then he heard it again. Compound 5. The words came from somewhere deep inside Vought Tower. This time there was more. A shipment, security protocols, laboratory containment procedures, children. Clark's expression darkened. Children. That word kept appearing. Whatever Compound V was, it involved children. And nobody spoke about it with pride, only fear. He focused harder, listening carefully, following fragments from one conversation to another. Piece by piece, a picture began to emerge. Not a complete picture, but enough. Enough to know innocent people had suffered. Enough to know powerful people were hiding the truth. Enough to know Vought would do almost anything to keep its secrets buried. A sudden voice interrupted his thoughts. Didn't think I'd find you sitting still. Clark turned. Huey Campbell stood a few feet away, looking nervous. Very nervous. Clark smiled. I didn't hear you coming. That's either a compliment or deeply concerning. Clark laughed softly. The tension immediately eased. Huey blinked. Most soups didn't laugh like normal people. Most soups didn't act like normal people. Everything about Superman felt different. For a moment, neither spoke. The city stretched endlessly below them. Finally, Huey broke the silence. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you doing this? Clark seemed genuinely confused. Doing what? Helping people. The answer sounded ridiculous the moment it left Huey's mouth. Yet he needed to hear it. Clark looked out across the skyline, then back at Huey. Because they need help. Huey waited. That was it. No deeper explanation, no hidden agenda, no speech about destiny, just a simple truth. Because they need help. For some reason, that answer hit harder than anything else. Far across the city, inside the highest floor of Vought Tower, Homelander stood alone before a wall of glass. The city glittered beneath him. Normally, the sight made him feel powerful. Tonight, it only reminded him of the stranger. The man who wasn't afraid. The man who didn't care about approval. The man everyone was starting to talk about. Slowly, Homelander's reflection smiled back at him. But the smile never reached his eyes. And for the first time in years, the most powerful man in the world began to wonder whether he truly was the most powerful man in the world. The thought followed Homelander everywhere, through interviews, through board meetings, through staged rescue operations. Like a splinter buried deep beneath the skin, impossible to ignore. 3 days earlier, the idea would have been laughable. Now it haunted him. He stood inside a private Vought studio while makeup artists adjusted his costume beneath harsh lights. A camera crew prepared for another carefully managed appearance, another performance, another opportunity to reassure the public that everything remained under control. Homelander stared into the mirror. The reflection stared back. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect image. Yet all he could see was a man standing motionless in the rain, while heat vision splashed harmlessly across his chest. 5 minutes, Homelander. The producer's voice broke his concentration. He nodded without looking away from the mirror. Across the city, Clark stood atop a church steeple overlooking Manhattan. The evening air carried thousands of conversations. Most he ignored. A medical emergency, a domestic dispute, a child separated from her parents. Small things. Important things. He helped where he could. Then he returned to listening, following threads, following clues, following the same trail that always led back to Vought and to Compound V. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. "You look like you're trying to solve a murder." Clark turned. Billy Butcher emerged from the shadows carrying 2 paper cups. He offered one. Clark accepted it. Coffee, still warm. "I appreciate the gesture." "Don't get sentimental," Butcher replied. For a moment they stood in silence, overlooking the city. Finally, Butcher spoke. "You really want to know about Compound V?" "Yes." "You won't like the answer." "I suspected as much." Butcher stared out at the skyline. "When most babies are born, they get a blanket." His voice had lost its usual sarcasm. "Some of them get injected." Clark's expression hardened. Injected with what? Compound V. Not chosen, not blessed, not born that way. A bitter laugh escaped Butcher. They manufactured them. For several seconds, neither spoke. Below them, millions of lights stretched toward the horizon. Millions of ordinary people. Most had no idea the world's greatest heroes had been engineered in a laboratory. "Children," Clark said quietly. Butcher nodded. "Children." The single word landed harder than anything else. For the first time since arriving in this universe, Clark understood the true scale of the tragedy. This wasn't simply corruption. This wasn't greed. This was theft. Entire lives altered before those children were old enough to choose for themselves. The anger rose quickly. He forced it back down. Anger solved very little. Truth solved more. "What happens if people learn the truth?" Clark asked. Butcher actually smiled. "The same thing that happens when you light a match in a gas station." Before Clark could respond, his head suddenly turned toward Manhattan. A distant alarm. Then another. Then dozens. His hearing expanded instantly. Security personnel shouting. Scientists panicking. Emergency protocols activating. Deep beneath Vought Tower, something had gone terribly wrong. "What is it?" Butcher asked. Clark listened carefully. "Containment breach. Sublevel 7. Medical emergency. Armed response required." The words echoed through the hidden facility. Someone was screaming. Someone else was begging for help. Then came the sound that truly caught Clark's attention, a child crying. His eyes narrowed. What happened? Clark rose slowly into the air. I don't know. The church steeple trembled beneath him. But I'm about to find out. Far across the city, red warning lights flooded corridors buried deep beneath Vought Tower. Armed security teams raced through reinforced checkpoints. Scientists abandoned their workstations. Nobody seemed entirely sure what had escaped, only that something had. Something dangerous. Something Vought desperately didn't want the public to see. Clark looked toward the distant tower. For days he had followed clues. For days he had listened from afar. That was over. The time for observation had ended. Now it was time for answers. The night exploded behind him as Superman accelerated toward Vought Tower. And somewhere beneath the building, hidden from the world for decades, a secret was waiting to meet him. By the time Superman reached Vought Tower, the containment breach was already spreading. Security teams flooded the underground corridors. Scientists shouted over one another. Emergency alarms pulsed through the facility like a heartbeat. Yet beneath the chaos, Clark heard something else. Fear. Not fear of what had escaped, fear of what might be discovered. He landed silently atop the tower and focused his vision downward. Steel vanished. Concrete became transparent. Floor after floor revealed itself. Executive offices, conference rooms, research departments, security checkpoints. Then, far below the public levels, he found it. Sub-level 7, the hidden laboratory. Rows of reinforced cells stretched through the underground complex. Armed guards rushed between containment doors. Medical staff evacuated research data while security teams prepared defensive positions. Whatever had happened down there, Vought seemed more concerned about protecting its secrets than protecting its people. Clark descended. Moments later, he landed inside an empty service corridor. The alarms continued flashing overhead. Nobody noticed him. Most were too busy running. A frightened technician stumbled around a corner and froze. His eyes widened. Is anyone hurt? Clark asked. The man blinked. What? Is anyone hurt? For several seconds, the technician simply stared. Then he pointed toward a sealed blast door. Lab C. Clark could hear screaming beyond it. Without another word, he moved. The reinforced steel door weighed several tons. He opened it as easily as a curtain. Inside, the scene resembled a disaster zone. Broken glass covered the floor. Medical equipment lay overturned. Several injured scientists were trapped beneath collapsed structures. A containment pod had ruptured. Clark immediately began helping. One injured researcher, then another, then another. Minutes passed. Not a single question about their jobs. Not a single accusation. Just rescue. The same thing he always did. One of the scientists stared at him in disbelief. You know what we do here. Clark carefully lifted a support beam. Maybe. And you're still helping us? Clark looked at him. You're injured. The answer seemed to confuse the man, as if kindness required qualification, as if compassion needed permission. Suddenly, Clark's attention shifted. Something else was moving deeper within the facility. Fast. Very fast. Not a monster, not a weapon. A person. Young. Terrified. Running. Clark followed the sound. Several corridors away, a teenage boy sprinted through the underground complex. Hospital clothing hung loosely from his frame. Security personnel chased him from behind. Stop! The boy ran harder. His heartbeat was racing. His breathing was uneven. Every sound told Clark the same story. Fear. Pure fear. The teenager turned a corner and nearly collided with Superman. He stopped instantly. Security guards appeared seconds later. Relief washed over them. Thank God. One guard raised his weapon. We'll take him from here. The boy immediately stepped backward. Clark noticed. The reaction was small, but telling. You know him? Clark asked. The guard hesitated. Classified. Why is he running? That's classified too. The teenager lowered his eyes. Clark could hear his pulse accelerating. He was terrified, not of Superman, of the guards. That told him everything. Clark looked at the boy. What's your name? Silence. Then finally, Tommy. The answer was barely a whisper. Are they trying to hurt you, Tommy? The teenager didn't answer. He didn't need to. His fear answered for him. The guards exchanged nervous glances. One activated a radio. That was a mistake, because within seconds, another voice came through. Cold, professional, familiar. Do not let the subject leave containment. Madeline Stillwell. Clark's expression changed. Subject. Not patient, not child. Subject. The word landed like a hammer. For the first time since entering the facility, he understood exactly what he was looking at. Not a laboratory, a factory. Not research, production. Human beings reduced to assets, experiments, products, inventory. Tommy looked up at him. For the first time, hope appeared in the boy's eyes. A fragile thing, but real. Clark placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Then he turned toward the guards. The corridor suddenly felt very quiet. I think, Superman said calmly, we need to have a conversation about what's happening down here. And somewhere high above the city, inside her office, Madeline Stillwell realized Superman had just reached the one place Vought could never allow him to see. Madeline Stillwell stared at the security monitor in silence. The image showed Superman standing beside Tommy in the middle of Sublevel 7. For a moment, nobody in the control room spoke. Years of secrecy, years of planning, years of buried evidence. And now the most powerful outsider on Earth was standing in the center of it. Stillwell picked up a phone. Lock down the entire facility. A technician hesitated. Ma'am, Superman is already inside. I am aware of that. The technician immediately began entering commands. Across the underground complex, reinforced blast doors started sliding into place. Security checkpoints sealed. Elevators shut down. Emergency protocols activated. Clark heard all of it. Every motor, every locking mechanism, every panicked conversation. Tommy heard it too. His face immediately paled. They're trapping us. Clark looked down at him. No. The boy blinked. Clark offered a reassuring smile. They're trapping themselves. For the first time, Tommy almost laughed. Almost. Meanwhile, armed security teams continued converging on their location. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. Not because they believed they could stop Superman, because they were afraid of what he might learn. That told Clark everything he needed to know. One nervous guard finally lowered his weapon. I don't want any trouble. Clark nodded. Neither do I. The man visibly relaxed. Then another voice shouted from behind. Detain the subject immediately. Every guard froze. Tommy flinched. Clark's eyes narrowed. Subject, again. Not a child, not a patient, a subject. The language revealed more than any report ever could. Clark crouched slightly so he was eye level with Tommy. How long have you been here? The boy swallowed. Most of my life. The answer hit harder than any punch. Your family? Tommy looked away. I don't know. For several seconds, Clark said nothing. He didn't trust himself to speak, because anger was becoming increasingly difficult to suppress. Not anger for himself, for Tommy, for every child hidden inside this facility, for every life treated like inventory. A faint voice suddenly reached his hearing. Then another, then another. Children, dozens of them, scattered throughout the underground complex. Some crying, some frightened, some simply waiting. Clark slowly stood. His expression changed. The guards noticed immediately. Not rage, something worse. Resolve. What is it? Tommy asked. Clark looked toward the deeper sections of the facility. There are others. The boy's eyes widened. You can hear them? Clark nodded. All of them. For the first time, Tommy smiled. A small smile, but genuine. Hope was contagious. Unfortunately for Vought, so was the truth. High above the laboratory, executives were beginning to panic. Emergency meetings erupted across multiple floors. Lawyers demanded damage control strategies. Public relations teams prepared statements. Nobody had a solution. Because every solution assumed Superman behaved like other powerful people. And he didn't. He couldn't be bribed, couldn't be threatened, couldn't be negotiated into silence. The realization was terrifying. Inside the corridor, another group arrived. This time it wasn't security. It was scientists, researchers, administrators, people who had spent years working in Sublevel 7. Several immediately began explaining, defending themselves, justifying their actions. We were helping people. This research saves lives. You don't understand the bigger picture. Clark listened, patiently, silently. When they finished, he asked only one question. Did the children choose to be here? Nobody answered. The silence was answer enough. One researcher lowered her eyes. Another stared at the floor. A third looked genuinely ashamed. Clark nodded slowly. I thought so. The corridor fell silent again. Then suddenly every alarm in the facility stopped. No flashing lights, no warning sirens, nothing. The sudden quiet felt wrong. Very wrong. Clark's hearing expanded instantly, searching, listening, and then he found the reason. A familiar heartbeat, a familiar voice, a familiar arrogance. High above the city, descending toward Vought Tower at incredible speed. Homelander. He had finally decided to get involved. Tommy noticed the change in Clark's expression. What is it? Clark looked upward, far above layers of steel and concrete, toward the approaching threat. For the first time since arriving in this universe, the two most powerful beings on Earth were about to meet again. And this time, there would be no empty rooftop between them. Homelander descended through the night like a missile. The closer he came to Vought Tower, the quieter the city seemed. His jaw was clenched. His thoughts were worse. For days he had listened to executives whisper about Superman. For days he had watched news reports compare them. For days he had seen public attention drift away from him. And now the stranger was inside Vaught's most heavily guarded facility. Inside a place even most members of the Seven had never seen. Homelander didn't know exactly what Sublevel 7 contained. That fact alone infuriated him. Nothing inside Vought was supposed to be hidden from him. Nothing. He landed hard on the roof of the tower. The impact cracked concrete. Several security officers nearby immediately stepped back. No one spoke. No one wanted to be the first. Finally, one executive cleared his throat. Sir, we've got the situation under... Homelander grabbed him by the collar. The man's feet left the ground instantly. Then why am I here? Nobody answered, because nobody had a good answer. Far below, Clark heard every word. He heard the executive's pulse spike. He heard the fear. He heard Homelander's growing instability. Tommy noticed Clark looking upward again. Is he coming? Clark nodded. The boy's face tightened. Even underground, everyone knew Homelander. Everyone. Some feared him. Some worshipped him. Most did both. Clark placed a hand on Tommy's shoulder. Stay behind me. The reassurance helped, a little. Meanwhile, several floors above them, Homelander marched through the facility. Security doors opened automatically. Scientists scattered from his path. Nobody wanted to slow him down. Nobody wanted his attention. The deeper he traveled underground, the angrier he became. Children, laboratories, containment units, research subjects. Every corridor raised new questions. Questions he didn't like. Questions Vought had apparently never intended to answer. His eyes narrowed. For the first time, he began wondering what else had been hidden from him. Then he heard Superman's voice. Calm, steady, somewhere ahead. Homelander accelerated instantly. The corridor shook. Lights flickered. Scientists pressed themselves against walls as he passed. Within seconds, he entered the main containment sector and stopped. Superman stood at the far end of the corridor. Tommy and several other children stood behind him. For a moment, neither man spoke. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then Homelander laughed. A short, humorless laugh. Of course. Clark remained calm. Hello, Homelander. You break into Vought. I was invited by the alarms. That earned a few nervous glances from the nearby staff. Homelander ignored them. His attention never left Superman. You really can't help yourself, can you? Clark looked at the children, then back at him. If people need help, no. For some reason, that answer made Homelander even angrier, because he believed it. The man wasn't pretending, wasn't performing, wasn't building a brand. He genuinely meant every word. Homelander hated that. It made everything feel fake. The interviews, the applause, the speeches, all of it. Clark could see the conflict behind his eyes, the frustration, the confusion, the loneliness. It reminded him of someone who had spent a lifetime searching for approval and never finding enough of it. Unfortunately, Homelander mistook compassion for pity. His eyes began glowing red. Several scientists immediately backed away. Tommy stepped behind Superman. Clark didn't move. Don't, Homelander smiled. Or what? The glow intensified. The air itself seemed to vibrate. Every person in the corridor braced for violence. Yet Clark remained completely relaxed. Or you'll scare them. For a brief second, Homelander actually glanced toward the children, toward the fear on their faces. Then he looked away, almost immediately, as if he couldn't bear it. That tiny moment told Clark more than any fight ever could. Deep beneath the anger and narcissism, there was still a part of Homelander that knew something was wrong, a part he spent every day trying to bury. The silence stretched. Then a terrified voice suddenly echoed from farther down the corridor. A child screaming, not from fear, from pain. Every head turned. Clark moved first. So did Homelander. Both vanished at the exact same instant. And for the first time since Superman arrived in this universe, they were racing toward the same destination. For one brief moment, neither of them cared about the argument. Neither cared about Vought. Neither cared about pride. A child was screaming, and both of them moved. The corridor exploded behind them as Superman and Homelander accelerated through the underground complex. Scientists stumbled backward. Security personnel threw themselves against walls. The two most powerful beings in the world disappeared around a corner. The screaming grew louder, then suddenly stopped. Clark arrived first, barely. The room beyond looked like another containment chamber. Medical equipment lay scattered across the floor. Several technicians had been thrown against the walls. A containment pod had shattered. At the center of the room stood a young girl no older than 10. Energy crackled across her skin. The lights overhead flickered violently. Every computer screen in the chamber flashed on and off. The child looked terrified. Not dangerous, terrified. Homelander arrived a fraction of a second later. His eyes immediately narrowed. What is this? One of the scientists slowly stood. His hands were shaking. Subject 72. Clark didn't like the term. Neither did the girl. He could hear her heartbeat accelerating every time they called her that. She has a name, Clark said. The scientist hesitated, then quietly answered. Emma. The girl's eyes widened, as if nobody had spoken her name in a very long time. Clark knelt slightly. Hi, Emma. She took a nervous step backward. Electric sparks jumped across the floor. Several nearby machines exploded. Emma immediately flinched. I'm sorry. The words came out in a rush. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Clark's expression softened. You don't have anything to apologize for. Another burst of energy surged from her hands. The room dimmed. More equipment failed. Emma looked ready to cry. Homelander watched silently. Something about the scene made him uncomfortable. Children usually looked at him with awe or fear. This girl barely seemed to notice he existed. Her attention remained locked entirely on Superman. Clark slowly extended a hand, not touching her, just offering. "It's okay." The electricity began to weaken. "It's not okay." Emma's voice trembled. "They said I broke everything." Clark glanced toward the scientists. Several immediately looked away. "Interesting. They told you that?" She nodded. Again the energy surged. Again she panicked. Clark remained perfectly calm. "No." The word stopped her. "No? You didn't break everything." Emma blinked. Clark looked around the room. The equipment broke. The distinction seemed small. To her, it meant everything. For the first time, her breathing began slowing. Across the observation deck above them, executives watched through reinforced glass. Some were worried about Emma. Most were worried about exposure. One executive finally spoke. "We need to move her." Clark heard him instantly. His expression hardened. Move her. Not help her. Not comfort her. Move her. Like cargo. Like inventory. Like property. The same attitude he had been seeing throughout the entire facility. Homelander heard it too. To Clark's surprise, Homelander frowned. A real frown. Not anger. Disapproval. "Interesting. Very interesting." The executive continued. "If Superman leaves with evidence of this..." Clark's eyes shifted upward. Evidence. That word again. They weren't afraid for the children. They were afraid of being discovered. The realization finally connected several missing pieces. This facility wasn't merely conducting research, it was hiding victims. Victims of Compound V. Children who had spent their lives behind locked doors. Children who had never chosen any of this. Children the public wasn't supposed to know existed. Emma suddenly looked toward Clark. "Are you leaving too?" The question hit harder than expected. He could hear the fear behind it, the expectation of abandonment, the certainty that everyone eventually walked away. Clark smiled gently. "Not today." For the first time since entering the room, Emma smiled back. A tiny smile, but real. Unfortunately, someone else had noticed. Far above the city, news helicopters were beginning to circle Vought Tower. Rumors were spreading. Employees were talking. Witnesses were leaking information. And somewhere in Manhattan, Billy Butcher had just received a phone call that made him slam on the brakes. "What?" Huey looked up from the passenger seat. Butcher stared out the windshield. His expression had gone completely serious. "They found something." "What?" Butcher started the SUV. "The thing Vaught's been hiding for decades." He accelerated into traffic. "What thing?" Butcher looked toward the distant tower. "The reason they're all terrified of Superman." And for the first time, the truth hidden beneath Vought was beginning to reach the surface. The first news report appeared 23 minutes later. Nobody knew exactly where the leak had originated. A security officer, a frightened technician, a junior researcher. It didn't matter. The story was out. A hidden facility beneath Vought Tower. Unauthorized human experimentation. Children. The word spread across social media like wildfire. Executives watched the headlines appear in real time. Each one felt like a gunshot. Inside the observation deck, panic was beginning to replace confidence. Lawyers argued. Public relations teams drafted statements. Investors demanded answers. Nobody seemed interested in the children. Clark noticed. He always noticed. Emma sat quietly beside him near the shattered containment chamber. Several other children had been gathered from nearby sections of the facility. Some were frightened. Some were confused. A few looked completely numb, as if years of isolation had taught them not to expect anything good. Clark spoke with each of them, learning names, listening, asking questions. Simple things, but important things. For many of them, it was the first normal conversation they had experienced in years. Homelander watched from across the room. The sight bothered him, not because he disliked the children, Because they trusted Superman immediately, without fear, without admiration, without expectation. They simply trusted him. Homelander couldn't remember ever experiencing that, not once. The realization left an unpleasant feeling in his chest. A scientist cautiously approached Clark. She looked exhausted, ashamed, and terrified. "Can we talk?" Clark nodded. The woman glanced nervously around the room, then lowered her voice. "There are more facilities." The room suddenly seemed quieter. Clark's expression didn't change, but his attention sharpened instantly. "How many?" "We don't know." The answer sounded honest. Some records were compartmentalized. She swallowed hard. This wasn't the only site. Nearby, Homelander looked up. Even he seemed surprised. The scientist continued. "There are other programs." "Other children?" The woman nodded. Clark closed his eyes briefly. The problem was larger than he had imagined. Much larger. Before he could ask another question, alarms suddenly erupted throughout the facility again. Different alarms this time. Not containment warnings. Security alerts. The scientist immediately paled. "What is it?" One of the technicians rushed toward a monitor. His face lost all color. "Oh no!" The words barely escaped his mouth. Clark looked toward the screen. Military vehicles, convoys, federal agents, multiple tactical response teams, all moving toward Vought Tower. Fast, very fast. Someone in Washington had finally noticed, and they wanted control of the situation. Homelander laughed. The sound echoed through the chamber. "They're sending soldiers?" Nobody answered, because everyone knew how absurd that sounded. Against Superman, against Homelander, against whatever secrets Vought had spent decades creating. Yet the convoys kept coming. Outside, helicopters now filled the skies above Manhattan. News networks broadcast live footage from every angle. The story was no longer contained. It belonged to the world. Deep inside Vought Tower, Madeline Stillwell watched the situation unravel. Years of careful planning, years of secrecy, years of control, all collapsing in a single evening. And at the center of it stood one man, Superman. Not because he had attacked them, not because he had threatened them, simply because he had asked questions. The realization was almost insulting. Meanwhile, Clark continued studying the incoming reports. Something didn't feel right. The government's response was too fast, too organized, as if someone had been waiting for an opportunity. Then he heard something. A heartbeat. Familiar. Very familiar. Not inside the facility, not outside the tower, several miles away, moving rapidly toward Manhattan. Clark's eyes narrowed. Homelander noticed immediately. "What?" Clark listened again. The heartbeat belonged to a child, a very special child, a child connected to Homelander. For the first time, uncertainty crossed Clark's face, because whatever was about to happen next wasn't coming from Vought. It wasn't coming from Washington. It was coming from Ryan. And judging by the fear in the boy's heartbeat, something had gone terribly wrong. Clark focused on the distant heartbeat. Ryan. The fear was unmistakable. Even from miles away, Clark could hear it. Fast, erratic, terrified. Whatever was happening, it wasn't ordinary. He turned toward Homelander. For the first time since arriving in this universe, he saw genuine concern flash across the man's face. Not anger, not pride, concern. "You know him," Clark said. Homelander's jaw tightened. Neither confirmation nor denial. He didn't need to answer. The reaction said enough. Clark listened again. A vehicle moving at high speed. Raised voices. Someone arguing. Someone crying. Ryan was in the middle of it. Without another word, Clark rose into the air. Homelander immediately stepped forward. "Where are you going?" "To help." The answer came automatically, as natural as breathing. For a second, Homelander looked as though he wanted to argue. Then he heard it too. Not the heartbeat, not from that distance. But something in Clark's voice, something undeniable. This wasn't about Vought. This wasn't about them. A child needed help, and neither of them could ignore that. Seconds later, they exploded out of the facility. The tower shook from the force of their departure. News helicopters scattered. Reporters shouted excitedly into cameras. Nobody understood why both of them had suddenly left. Inside the command center, Stillwell watched in confusion. What happened? No one knew. Outside, Superman and Homelander crossed Manhattan in seconds. The city blurred beneath them. Clark continued tracking Ryan's heartbeat, getting closer, closer. Then he found him. A black SUV sat sideways across an abandoned industrial roadway near the waterfront. Its front end was crushed. Steam rose from the engine. Several armed men surrounded the vehicle. Ryan sat inside, trapped, frightened. One of the men pointed a weapon through the shattered window. Clark arrived first. The gun disappeared from the man's hand. Then the weapon itself folded into a twisted knot of metal. The attackers froze. Homelander landed a heartbeat later. The concrete cracked beneath his boots. The armed men immediately stepped backward. Fear swept across their faces. One dropped his weapon entirely. Clark pulled open the damaged vehicle door. Ryan looked up. His face was streaked with tears. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ryan asked the question every frightened child eventually asks. Am I safe? Clark smiled gently. Yes. The answer seemed to calm him instantly. Ryan climbed out of the vehicle. Only then did Homelander step forward. The anger was gone. The arrogance was gone. For one brief moment, he wasn't Homelander. He was simply a father worried about his son. Ryan. The boy looked up. Dad. The single word hit harder than any punch. Clark watched carefully. The relationship wasn't simple. He could hear that much. There was love, fear, confusion, resentment, hope, all tangled together. Ryan took a hesitant step toward Homelander, then stopped. The hesitation was impossible to miss. Homelander noticed it too. The realization hurt. Clark could see it. The distance between them wasn't physical. It was emotional. Years of mistakes, years of fear, years of trying to force love instead of earning it. None of that could be fixed in a single night. Suddenly, one of the captured attackers spoke. We were paid. Everyone turned. The man looked terrified. Not of Homelander, not of Superman, of whoever had hired him. We were told to bring the kid in. Clark's expression hardened. Who hired you? The man hesitated, then shook his head. I don't know. Clark listened carefully. The heartbeat said otherwise. The man was lying. Before Clark could press further, a distant explosion echoed across Manhattan. Every head turned toward the skyline. A column of smoke rose from somewhere near Vought Tower. Then another. Then another. The facility they had just left was under attack. Not by protesters, not by the government. Something else. Something organized. Something powerful. Homelander stared toward the smoke. Clark did the same. The timing was too perfect. The attack on Ryan, the assault on Vought, the leaks. Someone was moving pieces across the board. And for the first time since arriving in this universe, Clark realized there might be a player in this game he hadn't noticed. Someone operating from the shadows. Someone who wanted chaos. Someone who had just made a very serious mistake. Because now, Superman was paying attention. The smoke continued rising above Manhattan. Thick, black, unnatural. Clark's hearing expanded instantly. The sounds reached him before the news helicopters arrived. Gunfire, explosions, panic, hundreds of terrified voices. Whatever was happening at Vought Tower, it was escalating fast. Ryan followed his gaze. What's happening? Clark looked down at him. I'm not sure yet. The answer was honest. That alone made Ryan trust him more. Most powerful people always seem to have answers. Clark never pretended. Homelander was already staring toward the city, his eyes narrowed. Someone had attacked Vought, his Vought. Ordinarily, that would have filled him with rage. Instead, he felt something else. Suspicion. The timing was too perfect. First the leaks, then Sublevel 7, then Ryan, now this. None of it felt random. The captured mercenary suddenly spoke again. "You don't understand." Everyone turned. The man's face had gone pale. "They planned this." Clark stepped closer. "Who?" The mercenary swallowed hard. "The people behind the attack." "Who are they?" The man's pulse accelerated. Fear. Real fear. "They call themselves Liberation." Neither Clark nor Homelander recognized the name. The mercenary continued. "They think Vought should burn." Another explosion echoed across the skyline. Even from miles away, the fireball was visible. Ryan flinched. Homelander immediately moved closer to him. The gesture surprised Clark. So did Ryan's reaction. The boy didn't step away. Not this time. Interesting. Very interesting. The relationship was damaged, but not broken. Not yet. Meanwhile, inside Vought Tower, the situation was rapidly collapsing. Armed attackers poured through multiple levels. Security teams fought desperately to contain them. Emergency systems failed one after another. Entire sections of the building lost power. Employees flooded stairwells trying to escape. For the first time in its history, Vought looked vulnerable. A voice suddenly reached Clark's hearing. Familiar, female, terrified. Starlight. She was trapped inside the tower, 3 floors below an active firefight. Clark's head turned immediately. Homelander noticed. "What now?" "People need help." The answer was becoming predictable. Homelander rolled his eyes. Yet he wasn't surprised. Not anymore. Clark looked toward Ryan, then toward Homelander. For a brief moment, the two men studied each other. Neither trusted the other completely, but something had changed. The hostility was fading, at least a little. "Can you keep him safe?" Clark asked. Homelander frowned. "Of course I can." Clark nodded. For some reason, that simple show of trust caught Homelander off guard. No challenge, no warning, no threat, just trust. Before Homelander could respond, Superman launched into the night sky. The shockwave rattled nearby warehouses. Ryan watched him disappear, then looked up at his father. "He's different." Homelander stared at the empty sky. For once, he didn't argue. Several miles away, Superman crashed through the smoke above Vought Tower. The scene below looked like a battlefield. Fire, collapsed walls, emergency responders, news helicopters, armed attackers moving through the chaos. And somewhere inside the building, Starlight was fighting for her life. Clark accelerated downward. Whatever liberation had started tonight, it was only the beginning. Superman tore through the smoke surrounding Vought Tower. Below him, Manhattan had become a sea of flashing lights. Police, fire crews, ambulances, news helicopters. The entire city was watching. For years, Vought had projected the image of absolute control. Tonight, that illusion was burning. Clark landed inside the tower through a section of collapsed exterior wall. Dust filled the air. Sprinklers poured water from damaged ceilings. Employees stumbled through smoke-filled corridors searching for exits. The moment they saw him, relief swept across their faces. Not because he was the strongest man alive, because help had arrived. Clark immediately began guiding civilians toward evacuation routes. One injured employee, then another, then another. The work came naturally. Save the people in front of you first. Everything else comes later. A distant explosion shook the building. The floor trembled. Somewhere above, structural supports were beginning to fail. Clark listened carefully. 3 attackers moving toward the executive floors. 7 security teams pinned down. Dozens of civilians trapped. And Starlight, still alive, still fighting. He accelerated deeper into the tower. Several floors below, Starlight crouched behind an overturned conference table. Energy crackled around her hands. The hallway outside looked like a war zone. Broken walls, shattered glass, bodies. Most were injured security personnel. A few belonged to liberation fighters. The attackers weren't amateurs. They moved with military precision. That worried her. Whoever organized this had planned it carefully. A voice suddenly echoed through the floor. "Annie!" Her head snapped up. Relief washed across her face. "Superman!" Clark stepped through the smoke. For a moment, she looked like she might actually laugh. "Please tell me you're here to save the day." Clark smiled. "I'm working on it." The humor lasted only a second. Then both returned to the situation at hand. "What do we know?" Clark asked. Starlight stood. "Not much." She pointed toward the upper levels. "They're heading somewhere specific." "Not random targets?" She shook her head. "No." That concerned Clark. Random violence was terrible. Organized violence was worse, because it meant someone had a plan. Suddenly, his hearing locked onto a conversation occurring 12 floors above them. Two liberation operatives, moving quickly, carrying explosives. One sentence immediately caught his attention. "The archive level." Clark's expression changed. Starlight noticed. "What is it?" "They're after records." Now she looked confused. "Records?" Clark nodded. "Not money, not hostages, not executives. Information. Someone wanted something hidden inside Vought. Something important enough to launch an assault. For the first time, Clark began wondering whether Liberation knew about Compound V. If they did, tonight could become much worse. Meanwhile, several miles away, Ryan sat inside a temporary command center established near the waterfront. Federal agents moved around him. Emergency vehicles came and went. The atmosphere felt tense. Ryan barely noticed. His attention remained fixed on the Manhattan skyline, specifically one figure flying through it. Superman. A quiet voice interrupted his thoughts. "He's pretty incredible." Ryan turned. Homelander stood nearby. For once, there were no cameras, no crowds, no speeches, just father and son. Ryan looked back toward the city. People trust him. The observation landed harder than he intended. Homelander heard it. So did Ryan. An awkward silence followed. Finally, Homelander asked, "Do people trust me?" Ryan didn't answer immediately. That hesitation hurt more than any response could have. Back inside Vought Tower, Superman and Starlight reached the archive level. The hallway was empty. Too empty. Clark immediately stopped. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Then he heard it. A ticking sound. Barely audible. Hidden behind reinforced walls. Multiple devices. Explosives. His eyes widened. There were dozens of them, and the countdown had already begun. Clark's vision immediately pierced the walls. The explosives were hidden throughout the archive level. Support columns, maintenance shafts, electrical conduits. Someone had planned this carefully, very carefully. Starlight saw the change in his expression. "What is it?" "Bombs." The single word drained the color from her face. "How many?" Clark listened again, counted, tracked. "Too many." The timers were synchronized. If they detonated together, the entire archive section would collapse, possibly several floors with it. Anyone still inside would be buried. Starlight looked toward the corridor. "Can you stop them?" Clark nodded, then paused. Something wasn't right. The bombs felt almost secondary, like a distraction, a means to an end. His hearing expanded, searching, listening, looking beyond the obvious. Then he found it. Several Liberation operatives were already leaving the building, fast, carrying something. Not money, not weapons, data drives. Dozens of them. Clark finally understood. The explosives weren't the objective. They were the escape plan. Someone had already taken what they came for. Starlight, "What?" "They got the records." Her eyes widened. "What records?" "I don't know yet." The answer frustrated him. For the first time all night, he lacked information. The countdown continued. 3 minutes. Starlight clenched her fists. What do we do? Clark looked at the walls, the explosives, the civilians still evacuating below, then toward the fleeing attackers. Too many problems, not enough time. Finally, he made a decision. You stop the thieves. What? I'll handle the bombs. Starlight hesitated, then nodded. She trusted him. Most people did. Within seconds, she was gone. Energy flared around her as she raced toward the fleeing operatives. Clark immediately got to work. One explosive, then another, then another. His hands moved faster than human eyes could follow. Carefully, precisely. Every device removed, every detonator disabled, every charge secured. The work would have seemed impossible to anyone else. For Superman, it was simply another rescue. 2 minutes remaining. Across Manhattan, the news coverage intensified. Millions of viewers watched events unfold live. Commentators speculated wildly. Government officials issued statements. Vought executives denied everything. Almost no one knew the truth. Yet. At the Waterfront Command Center, Ryan sat beside a monitor showing aerial footage of the tower. Homelander stood nearby. Neither spoke. The earlier conversation lingered between them. Uncomfortable, unfinished. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. Why doesn't he hate you? Homelander looked down. What? Superman. Ryan pointed toward the screen. He knows what you've done. The question hit harder than Ryan realized. Homelander looked away. Because he didn't know the answer. Not really. Everyone else either feared him, admired him, or hated him. Superman seemed to do none of those things. And somehow that was the most confusing reaction of all. Back inside the tower, Clark disabled the final explosive with 32 seconds remaining. The immediate danger was gone, but the real problem remained: the stolen data. His hearing expanded again, searching the city, searching the roads, searching the rivers. Then he found them. 3 vehicles moving south. Fast, very fast. The Liberation Team, still carrying the stolen archives. Clark rose into the air, then froze. Something inside the data drives had triggered his attention. Not the drives themselves, the conversations surrounding them. One operative laughed, another celebrated. Then a third spoke words that made Clark's blood run cold. We've got the Compound V files. The room suddenly felt smaller. The archives, the attack, the theft. It had all been about Compound V. Not money, not revenge, the truth. And whoever now possessed those files held enough information to change the world forever. Clark launched through the shattered ceiling. The night exploded around him, because if those files were released carelessly, millions of lives could be affected. And somewhere ahead, speeding through the darkness, was the first person to obtain Vaught's deepest secrets. The question was no longer whether the truth would come out. The question was who would control it. The question was no longer whether the truth would come out. The question was who would control it. Superman accelerated across the night sky. Below him, 3 black vehicles raced through the streets of Manhattan. The Liberation operatives were moving fast, but not fast enough. Clark could have reached them in seconds. Instead, he listened. People revealed more when they believed they were safe. Inside the lead vehicle, the operatives were celebrating. Years of planning, years of infiltration, years of sacrifice. All of it had led to tonight. One woman sat in the back seat holding a hardened case against her chest. The stolen archive drives, the Compound V files, the proof. She guarded them like treasure. To Clark, that was concerning. Truth should never become treasure. The moment people started treating it like a weapon, innocent lives often paid the price. His hearing focused further, and what he heard next made him slow down. We release everything. The speaker was male, confident, determined. No redactions, no delays, no negotiations. Several others immediately agreed. Clark frowned. That was reckless. The public deserved the truth. But dumping every stolen file into the world at once could expose victims, children, witnesses, and people who had never chosen to be part of Vaught's crimes. The truth mattered. So did responsibility. Suddenly another voice spoke. Older, calmer. Then we're no better than they are. The vehicle fell silent. Interesting. There was disagreement within liberation itself. Clark listened carefully. The older woman continued. There are names in those files. No one cares. I care. The argument intensified. For the first time, Clark realized liberation wasn't one organization. It was a coalition. People united by anger. People united by loss. People united by what Vought had taken from them. And anger rarely stayed organized for long. Ahead of the convoy, a bridge stretched across the river. The lead vehicles accelerated toward it. Clark was about to intercept them when another sound caught his attention. A familiar heartbeat. Homelander. Approaching rapidly. Very rapidly. Clark stopped midair. Not because he feared the arrival, because he knew what it might mean. Seconds later, Homelander appeared beside him. The air cracked from the sudden stop. For a moment, they simply hovered above the city, watching the convoy below. Found them? Homelander asked. Yes. The files? Clark nodded. Homelander looked toward the vehicles. Then let's take them. The answer came so quickly it almost sounded obvious. Clark glanced at him. And then what? Homelander frowned. What do you mean? What happens after we take them? The question seemed to genuinely confuse him. For Homelander, problems were usually simple. Remove the threat, end the problem, move on. Clark saw the world differently because people were involved. People were always involved. The truth is coming out, Clark said. Good. Maybe. Homelander looked irritated. Clark continued. Some of those files belong to victims. That got his attention. Children. Now Homelander was listening. The truth needs to come out. Clark looked toward the convoy. But innocent people shouldn't pay for Vaught's crimes. For several seconds, Homelander said nothing. Then surprisingly, he nodded. Not because he agreed completely, because for the first time he was actually considering the consequences. The growth was small, but real. Unfortunately, neither man noticed the fourth vehicle. Not at first. It wasn't traveling with the convoy. It was already miles ahead, moving in the opposite direction, carrying something far more important than archive drives. Clark heard it before he saw it. A heartbeat. Weak. Exhausted. Frightened. A child. Then another. And another. His expression hardened instantly. The convoy wasn't the real target. It never had been. The stolen files were a distraction, a cover. Someone had used the attack on Vought to move children out of another hidden facility. Children connected to Compound V. Children nobody was supposed to know existed. Clark turned toward the distant highway. Homelander immediately noticed. What now? Clark listened again. Counting. Tracking. 32 heartbeats. 32 terrified children being transported somewhere unknown. His eyes narrowed. The files can wait. And before Homelander could ask another question, Superman shot into the darkness. Because somewhere ahead, 32 children were disappearing. And Clark Kent had no intention of letting that happen. The night blurred around him. 32 heartbeats, 32 frightened children, all moving together, all hidden inside a convoy of unmarked transport trucks racing north along a deserted highway. Clark's hearing remained locked on them. Some were crying, some were whispering, most were silent. The silence bothered him most. Children should not sound resigned. Children should not sound like prisoners who had already accepted their fate. Far behind him, Homelander accelerated to catch up. What did you find? Kids. The answer came immediately. Homelander's expression darkened. How many? 32. For several seconds, neither spoke. The highway stretched ahead beneath the moonlight. The convoy maintained its speed. Whoever was running the operation clearly believed they remained undiscovered. That assumption was about to become a problem. Clark descended first. The lead truck driver never even saw him arrive. One moment the road was empty. The next, Superman was standing directly in front of the convoy. The driver slammed on the brakes. Tires screamed. Metal groaned. The entire line of trucks skidded violently across the pavement. Several nearly jackknifed. Within seconds, the convoy ground to a halt. Armed guards poured from the vehicles. Weapons raised. Orders shouted. Chaos erupted. Clark remained exactly where he was. Calm. Motionless. Patient. One guard pointed a rifle toward him. Another aimed a launcher. A third barked orders into a radio. Clark listened. Professional. Disciplined. Not mercenaries. Not criminals. Something else. Interesting. Very interesting. Homelander landed beside him. The asphalt shattered beneath his boots. The guards immediately lost whatever confidence they had left. One man actually dropped his weapon. Clark stepped forward. I don't want anyone hurt. The statement was simple, honest. Most ignored it. One nervous commander raised his rifle anyway. Stand down! Clark couldn't tell whether the order was meant for his own men or for Superman. The commander's pulse was racing. Fear, confusion, guilt. That last one caught Clark's attention. Guilt meant the man knew something. A truck door suddenly opened, then another, then another. The children began emerging, slowly, cautiously. Most looked exhausted. Several wore hospital wristbands. A few appeared no older than 6 or 7. None looked dangerous, just scared. One little girl froze when she saw Superman. For a moment, she simply stared. Then she asked the question almost every child eventually asked. Are you really him? Clark smiled. I think so. A few of the older children laughed. The tension eased immediately. Even Homelander noticed it. The effect Clark had on people wasn't power. It wasn't strength. It was comfort. The realization unsettled him, because despite all his abilities, he had never inspired that feeling. A sudden voice interrupted the moment. Don't move. Everyone turned. The convoy commander had lowered his weapon, but now he looked terrified. Not of Superman, of something else. Something approaching. Clark heard it before anyone else. Aircraft. Fast. Military fast. Multiple signatures, closing rapidly. Homelander heard them a second later. His eyes narrowed. That's new. 3 black aircraft burst over the horizon. No markings, no identification, no transponders. Nothing. The convoy commander immediately went pale. They found us. Clark looked at him. Who found you? The man didn't answer. He didn't have time. The lead aircraft opened fire. Not at Superman, not at Homelander, at the convoy, at the children. The first explosion lit up the night, and every illusion about who was really pulling the strings shattered instantly. Because whoever had ordered this attack wasn't trying to recover the children. They were trying to erase them. Because whoever had ordered this attack wasn't trying to recover the children. They were trying to erase them. The second missile launched seconds later. Clark was already moving. The projectile vanished from the sky before it reached the convoy. A brilliant flash erupted hundreds of feet above the highway. The shock wave rolled harmlessly across the landscape. The children looked up in amazement. The pilots did not. A third missile launched, then a fourth, then 6 more. Someone had decided overwhelming force was the answer. Clark intercepted them all. Explosions illuminated the night one after another. To the children below, it looked like a storm of artificial stars. Homelander stared upward. Even he seemed impressed. That's excessive. Clark barely heard him. His attention was elsewhere, inside the aircraft. inside the communications channels, listening, searching. Someone was directing the operation remotely. A command center, a coordinator, a voice. Then he found it. A woman. Calm, professional, completely detached. Target package must be eliminated. No hesitation, no concern, no mention of rescue, only elimination. Clark's expression hardened. The children weren't witnesses. They weren't people. They were loose ends. The realization made his stomach turn. Below, panic was spreading through the convoy. Several children had begun crying. Others clung to one another. One little boy covered his ears and squeezed his eyes shut. Clark descended immediately. The explosion stopped. The noise faded. He landed in front of them and knelt. The transformation was immediate. Fear began giving way to relief, not because the danger had passed, because someone was standing between them and the danger. A barrier stronger than steel, a promise stronger than words. Above them, Homelander watched. The children ran towards Superman automatically, not because they knew him, because they trusted him. The sight stirred something uncomfortable inside Homelander, something unfamiliar, jealousy. Not of the power, not of the strength, of the connection. For all his life, people had feared him, admired him, obeyed him, but very few had ever trusted him. The difference suddenly felt enormous. A nearby child looked up at him. Homelander stiffened. The girl couldn't have been older than 8. She stared for a moment, then asked, "Are you helping too?" The question caught him completely off guard. For several seconds he didn't answer. The little girl waited patiently. Finally, Homelander cleared his throat. "Yeah." The word felt strange, awkward, almost foreign. Yet the child smiled, a genuine smile. "Good." Then she ran back toward the others. Homelander stood motionless. Somehow that tiny interaction affected him more than any battle ever had. Unfortunately, the aircraft were not finished. The lead pilot received new orders. The command came immediately. No hesitation, no discussion. "Deploy Asset 0. Clark heard the words. So did Homelander. Both men looked toward the aircraft simultaneously. Neither liked what they heard. The cargo bay doors began opening. Something emerged. Not a missile, not a bomb. A person. A figure dropped from the aircraft thousands of feet above the highway. No parachute, no fear, no attempt to slow the descent. The individual struck the ground nearly a mile away. The impact created a crater visible even from their position. Dust rose into the air. The earth trembled beneath their feet. Several children screamed. The figure slowly stood, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a containment collar around the neck. Even from this distance, Clark could hear the heartbeat, abnormally strong, enhanced, engineered, compound V, a lot of compound V. The stranger lifted his head, then smiled. Not at the children, not at Homelander, directly at Superman, as though this meeting had been anticipated, as though someone had been preparing for it for a very long time. And for the first time since arriving in this universe, Clark felt something he hadn't felt yet. Uncertainty. Because whoever this was, they weren't afraid of him. The realization settled over the highway like a storm cloud. Dust continued drifting from the crater. The stranger stood motionless at its center, watching, waiting. The children had gone silent. Even the aircraft above seemed to be holding position, as though everyone understood the same thing. Something important was about to happen. Clark listened carefully. The heartbeat was unlike anything he had encountered in this universe. Powerful, controlled, steady. Not the frantic rhythm of someone eager for a fight. Not the arrogance he associated with many of Vaught's creations. This person was calm. That worried him. Homelander stepped forward. "Who the hell is that?" For once, nobody had an answer. The stranger finally began walking toward them. Slowly, deliberately. Every step crushed asphalt beneath his boots. The containment collar around his neck glowed faintly. Its surface was covered in scratches. Years of scratches. Years of damage. Years of failed attempts to break it. Interesting. Very interesting. The man stopped 50 yards away. His eyes moved across the convoy, across the children, across Homelander, finally settling on Superman. Then he smiled. Not a cruel smile, a sad one. You came. The voice was deep, tired, ancient in a way Clark couldn't quite explain. Homelander frowned. You know him? The stranger ignored the question. His gaze never left Superman. They said you would come. Clark remained calm. Who said that? The people who fear you. The answer wasn't particularly helpful. The stranger looked toward the aircraft overhead. A trace of disappointment crossed his face. They're still doing this. One of the children suddenly stepped closer to Superman. The man noticed immediately. His expression softened. For a moment, he looked less like a weapon and more like someone carrying a very old wound. Clark took a step forward. I don't want anyone hurt. The stranger laughed quietly. I know. The answer surprised him. Most people didn't believe that. Most assumed strength existed to dominate, to conquer, to win. This man seemed to understand, which raised even more questions. Above them, a voice crackled through a military communication channel. Impatient, angry. Asset Zero, complete the mission. The stranger's eyes closed briefly, as though he were exhausted, not physically, emotionally. When he opened them again, he looked directly at Clark. Do you know what they call people like us? Clark said nothing. The stranger answered anyway. Assets. The word hung in the air. Several children visibly flinched. They knew that word. Clark knew it too. He had heard it repeatedly inside Vaught's facilities. Not people. Assets. Not children. Assets. Not lives. Assets. The stranger touched the collar around his neck. They stopped using my name a long time ago. Something tightened in Clark's chest, because he understood exactly what had happened. The man standing before him wasn't merely another experiment. He was a victim. One of the earliest. One of the forgotten. One of the people the system had consumed and discarded. Homelander shifted impatiently. Can somebody explain what's happening? For perhaps the first time in his life, Homelander wasn't the center of the story. The stranger finally glanced toward him. Recognition flashed across his face. You. Homelander frowned. What about me? The stranger studied him for several seconds, then shook his head. They failed you too. The words landed harder than expected. Homelander's expression darkened immediately. Yet beneath the anger, Clark heard something else. Pain. The stranger wasn't mocking him. He meant it. Suddenly, one of the aircraft overhead changed position. Then another. Then another. Clark's hearing locked onto a transmission. Asset Zero is compromised. A pause. Then the response. Terminate all assets. Clark's eyes widened. All assets. Not just Asset Zero. The children. The convoy. Everyone. The aircraft began opening additional weapon bays. Missiles. Dozens of them. Far more than before. This wasn't an extraction. This was extermination. The stranger looked up at the sky, then toward the children, then toward Superman. For the first time, genuine urgency entered his voice. You need to get them out of here. Clark took a step forward. What about you? The stranger smiled, a tired smile. The smile of someone who had spent far too long believing they were disposable. I'll buy you time. And before Clark could respond, Asset Zero launched himself into the sky toward the incoming missiles. The collar broke. The sound wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It was worse. A single metallic snap echoed across the highway. Then silence. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. Daniel remained exactly where he was, On one knee, head lowered, motionless. The children watched. Ryan watched. Homelander watched. Clark didn't move. His instincts screamed at him to prepare, but not for a fight, for a rescue. A pulse of energy suddenly rippled outward, not violent, not destructive, massive. The night sky itself seemed to bend. Clouds scattered for miles. The remaining aircraft lost power instantly. Engines died. Lights vanished. One by one, they began falling from the sky. Clark launched upward immediately. Within seconds, he caught the first aircraft, then the second, then the third, carefully lowering each one to the ground. By the time he returned, Daniel was standing. The broken collar lay at his feet. His eyes were closed, his breathing steady, calm, too calm. Homelander frowned. "I don't like this." For once, Clark agreed. The energy pouring from Daniel wasn't wild, it was controlled, which meant Daniel had never been the problem. The collar had been. Daniel slowly opened his eyes. The glow was gone. No red light, no crackling energy, no signs of instability, just exhaustion. Deep, overwhelming exhaustion. The kind carried by someone who had spent years fighting a battle nobody else could see. Ryan stepped forward. "Daniel?" The man looked down. A faint smile appeared. "I'm still here." Relief swept across the children. Several actually cheered. Clark studied him carefully. The power levels had changed, not increased. Changed. For the first time, Daniel wasn't spending energy resisting the collar. The realization hit him immediately. The device hadn't been containing a monster, it had been torturing a victim. Homelander looked toward the shattered pieces on the highway. "They told everyone that thing was protecting us." Daniel laughed. The sound contained no humor. It was protecting them. The words hung in the air. Them. Not us. Them. Vought. The people who created him. The people who buried him. The people who feared what he represented. The truth. A distant vibration suddenly reached Clark's hearing. Phones. Thousands of them. Televisions. News broadcasts. Social media. Everywhere. Something was happening. Fast. Very fast. His hearing expanded. Reporters. Government officials. Leaked documents. Compound V. The archive files. They were spreading across the world. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Now. The truth was finally escaping. And unlike Daniel, it could never be locked up again. Several miles away, inside what remained a Vought tower, executives stared at their screens in horror. Internal reports, experiment logs, financial records, video evidence, decades of secrets. Public. Every one of them. The Empire wasn't under attack anymore. The Empire was dying. Clark looked toward Manhattan. He could hear panic spreading through boardrooms. He could hear arrests being ordered. He could hear careers ending. For the first time since arriving in this universe, Vought was losing control. And somewhere in the city, one heartbeat suddenly accelerated. Familiar. Angry. Terrified. Homelander. Clark turned toward him. The same realization had reached him. The world now knew everything. And for the first time in his life, Homelander would have to decide who he was without Vought. The answer frightened him more than any enemy ever could. For the first time in his life, Homelander would have to decide who he was without Vought. The answer frightened him more than any enemy ever could. Nobody spoke. Not Ryan, not Daniel, not even Superman. The night felt different now, as though something fundamental had shifted. Because it had. For decades, Vought had controlled the narrative, the heroes, the villains, the truth. Now the truth belonged to everyone. And the world was reacting. Fast. Clark's hearing stretched across the globe. News anchors interrupting broadcasts. Government officials demanding answers. Former employees coming forward. Victims finally being believed. The dam had broken, and there was no stopping the flood. Ryan looked toward Manhattan. "What's happening?" Clark answered honestly. People are learning the truth. The boy nodded. For some reason, that seemed important to him. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, emergency meetings erupted across the country. Federal agencies, military leaders, corporate executives, everyone wanted the same thing: control. Everyone except Superman, because control had never been his goal. Helping people was. That difference was about to matter. A sudden explosion of sound echoed through Clark's hearing. Not physical, digital. Millions of phones receiving the same notification. One video, uploaded everywhere simultaneously. Every platform, every network, every screen. Clark listened. Then his expression changed. Daniel noticed immediately. What is it? Clark looked toward the city. Someone released footage. The words immediately caught Homelander's attention. What kind of footage? Clark didn't answer right away, because he was listening, watching through thousands of reactions. Shock, disgust, outrage, fear. Then he found the source, Sub-Level 7, the children, the experiments, the recordings, everything, public. Daniel closed his eyes. He didn't need details. He already knew. The world was finally seeing what had happened. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Ryan quietly asked, "Is that good?" Clark thought carefully before answering. "Truth is good." Ryan nodded. "What about what people do with it?" That question surprised everyone, especially Homelander. Clark smiled slightly. "That's the hard part." The answer lingered, because it was true. Truth alone didn't save people. People did. Far above them, the first rays of morning sunlight began touching the horizon. The night was ending. Yet the biggest challenge still remained. Not Daniel, not the children, not even Vought. Homelander. Clark could hear it. The anger, the confusion, the fear. Everything was building. The world he'd known was disappearing, and he had no idea what came next. Finally, Homelander spoke. "Did you know?" Clark looked at him. "Know what?" "That this would happen." The question carried more weight than it seemed. Clark understood. Homelander wasn't asking about Vought. He was asking about himself, about everything. Clark shook his head. "No." For a moment, disappointment crossed Homelander's face. Then Clark continued. "But I knew lies don't last forever." Silence. Homelander stared toward Manhattan, toward the collapsing empire that had built him, protected him, used him. The realization was beginning to sink in. Vought hadn't loved him. Vought had owned him. And ownership was not the same thing. Ryan slowly moved closer to Clark. The gesture didn't go unnoticed. Homelander saw it. The hurt was immediate. But this time, something else appeared beside it. Understanding. For the first time, he realized trust couldn't be demanded. It had to be earned. A distant roar suddenly rolled across the horizon. Then another. Military aircraft, dozens of them, approaching Manhattan, approaching Vought, approaching the center of the storm. Daniel looked toward the sky. Clark did the same. The world had finally learned the truth. Now everyone was rushing to decide what came next. And standing in the middle of it all were three men. One who had been broken, one who had been corrupted, and one who had chosen, every day of his life, to be better. The collision between those paths was coming, and none of them could stop it. The collision between those paths was coming, and none of them could stop it. The sun finally broke over the horizon. Golden light spread across the highway. For the first time all night, everything was quiet. No missiles, no explosions, no alarms, just silence. Clark welcomed it, because silence gave people room to think. Unfortunately, not everyone wanted to think. Across Manhattan, panic was spreading faster than any fire. Vought executives were abandoning offices. Private jets were being fueled. Accounts were being emptied. Lawyers were disappearing. Everyone who had helped build the empire suddenly wanted distance from it. The ship was sinking, and the rats knew it. Clark listened to it all. The fear, the desperation, the excuses. Nobody accepted responsibility. Not yet. Then another sound caught his attention. News helicopters, hundreds of them, all converging on a single location. Vought Tower, the symbol of the empire, the place where everything had started. Daniel looked toward the city. They'll tear it apart. His voice carried no sympathy, only certainty. Homelander said nothing. For the first time, Clark wasn't sure what he was feeling. Anger, grief, relief, probably all three. Ryan broke the silence. What happens now? The question hung in the air. Nobody answered immediately, because nobody knew. Then Clark finally spoke. Now people decide what kind of world they want. Daniel laughed quietly. You have a lot more faith in people than I do. Clark smiled. Usually. The answer surprised Daniel. Usually? People make mistakes. Clark looked toward Manhattan. Sometimes very big ones. Daniel nodded. That much he understood. But they can also surprise you. Before Daniel could respond, Homelander suddenly looked upward. His expression hardened. Clark heard it a fraction of a second later. A familiar heartbeat. Fast. Determined. Approaching from Manhattan. Then another. And another. Several powerful heartbeats. Soups. Coming directly toward them. Within seconds, streaks appeared across the morning sky. A-Train. The Deep. Black Noir. The remaining members of the Seven. They landed nearly 100 yards away. None looked happy. None looked confident. A-Train glanced at Superman, then at Daniel, then at Homelander. Well, his voice sounded nervous. This is awkward. Nobody laughed. The Deep shifted uncomfortably. Black Noir remained silent as always. Finally, A-Train stepped forward. Vought wants us back. Daniel laughed. The sound carried genuine amusement this time. Vought wants a lot of things. A-Train ignored him. His attention remained fixed on Homelander. We need leadership. The statement landed heavily, because for the first time in years, Vought wasn't giving orders. It was begging. Homelander stared at them, at the uniforms, at the symbols, at everything he had spent his life serving. Then he looked at Superman. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. One man had power because a corporation created him. The other had power because fate handed it to him. Yet only one of them had chosen to become a hero. The realization hit harder than ever. A-Train finally lost patience. Homelander, no response. We need to know what we're doing. Still nothing. Everyone waited. Finally, Homelander spoke. Quietly, almost to himself. No. A-Train blinked. What? Homelander looked directly at him. No. The word echoed across the empty highway. For the first time in his life, Homelander had refused Vought. And somewhere deep inside Vought Tower, panic became terror. Because the one thing the company had always counted on had just stopped obeying. Because the one thing the company had always counted on had just stopped obeying. Nobody moved. Not A-Train, not the Deep, not even Black Noir. The words hung in the morning air. Heavy, unavoidable. A-Train looked genuinely confused, as though the possibility had never occurred to him. Homelander, his voice sounded uncertain. What are you doing? Homelander laughed quietly, not the arrogant laugh people knew from television, not the threatening laugh. This one sounded tired, very tired. My whole life. He looked toward Manhattan, toward Vought Tower, toward the empire that had shaped every part of him. I thought they needed me. Nobody spoke. Even Superman remained silent. Homelander continued, but they were just using me. The realization seemed to hurt more now that he was finally saying it out loud. The Deep shifted nervously. A-Train looked away. Because deep down they knew it too. They always had. They just never wanted to admit it. Suddenly, every phone on the highway began ringing simultaneously, one after another. Government alerts, breaking news, Emergency broadcasts. Clark listened. Then his expression changed. Daniel noticed immediately. What now? Clark looked toward the city. Arrest warrants. A-Train frowned. For who? Clark's eyes remained fixed on Manhattan. Everyone. The answer hit like a bomb. Vought executives, researchers, board members, security directors, dozens of names, then hundreds. The government wasn't investigating anymore. It was moving. Fast. For years, nobody had been willing to challenge Vought. Now everyone wanted to be first. A-Train pulled out his phone. His face immediately drained of color. Oh. The Deep looked over his shoulder, then muttered something under his breath. Neither looked happy. For the first time, they understood. The world they had known was over. Suddenly, another sound reached Clark's hearing. A familiar voice. Broadcast globally. Live. Madeline Stillwell. Everyone turned toward a nearby news helicopter where a reporter was playing the feed. Stillwell appeared on screen. Calm. Composed. Exactly as always. But Clark could hear the difference. Her heartbeat was elevated, her breathing uneven. Fear. Real fear. My fellow Americans. The broadcast echoed across countless devices. The information released today has been manipulated. Daniel laughed immediately. Homelander rolled his eyes. Even Ryan looked unconvinced. Stillwell continued. Vought International has always acted in the best interests of humanity. Nobody on the highway seemed interested anymore, except Clark, because he wasn't listening to the speech. He was listening beneath it, to another conversation, one occurring far below Vought Tower. Hidden, secret, urgent. A group of executives preparing to flee, not with money, not with records, with something else, something living. Clark's expression hardened instantly. What is it? Ryan asked. Clark listened again. Children, more children, dozens of them, hidden beneath the tower. The realization hit him like a punch. Sub-Level 7 wasn't the only facility. It wasn't even the biggest. Daniel saw the change immediately. What did you hear? Clark looked toward Manhattan, then toward Daniel, then toward Homelander. His voice became very quiet. The children. Daniel froze. What children? Clark's eyes narrowed. The ones Vought never told anyone about. The morning suddenly felt colder, because while the world was celebrating Vaught's fall, the worst secret of all was still buried beneath the tower. And for the first time since refusing Vaught's orders, Homelander looked toward Manhattan with genuine anger. Not anger for himself, not anger for his reputation, anger for the children. And Clark realized something important. The battle he'd been expecting might not happen the way anyone imagined. Because for the first time in his life, Homelander had finally found something worth fighting for. The realization unsettled him. Not because it felt wrong, because it felt right. And that was far more frightening. The highway fell silent. Everyone was watching him. The Seven, Ryan, Daniel, even Superman. Waiting. Homelander hated waiting. Usually. This time, he understood why. A choice was being made. One that couldn't be undone. Clark looked toward Manhattan. The hidden children were still there. Dozens of heartbeats. Scared. Confused. Waiting. They had no idea the world above was changing. No idea that Vought was collapsing around them. No idea that people were finally coming. Daniel stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the distant skyline. How many? Clark listened again, carefully. 43. Daniel closed his eyes. 43. 43 more lives hidden away. 43 more reasons Vought deserved to fall. A-Train lowered his head. The Deep looked sick. Even Black Noir seemed unusually still. Nobody was celebrating anymore. Not after hearing that. Ryan finally spoke. We have to get them. The simplicity of the statement made everyone pause, because he was right. There was no debate, no strategy meeting, No discussion. Children were in danger. That was enough. Clark smiled. Yeah, Ryan smiled back. Homelander watched the exchange, then looked toward Manhattan, toward Vought Tower, toward the place that had created him, used him, lied to him, and hidden children beneath its foundations. His jaw tightened. For years he had protected the company. Now he couldn't stop wondering how many times he had protected monsters. The thought made him angry, very angry. A-Train suddenly looked up. What's the plan? Clark answered immediately. We get the children out. Daniel nodded. And after that? Clark looked toward the city. The answer was obvious. We end this. Nobody asked what this meant. They already knew. Vought, the lies, the secrets, the fear, all of it. The morning air exploded as Superman launched into the sky. A second later, Daniel followed. Then, to everyone's surprise, Homelander. The shock waves rolled across the highway. Ryan watched them disappear toward Manhattan. For a brief moment, he looked worried. Then a voice spoke beside him. You trust him. Ryan turned. A-Train stood nearby. The question wasn't about Homelander. It wasn't about Daniel. Everyone knew who he meant. Ryan looked toward the shrinking figure in the sky. Yeah. A-Train laughed softly. Wish I knew what that felt like. Meanwhile, Vought Tower was descending into chaos. Executives were fleeing. Security systems were failing. Emergency evacuations were underway. Stillwell's broadcast had ended. Nobody believed it anyway. The truth was moving too fast. Too many files. Too many witnesses. Too much evidence. The Empire was dying. Deep beneath the tower, however, one final secret remained. 43 children, locked behind reinforced containment doors, hidden from the world, hidden from justice, hidden from hope. A senior executive hurried through the underground facility. His hands shook as he entered security codes. Destroy records, erase evidence, leave nothing behind. That had been the order. Then every monitor in the corridor suddenly went dark. The man froze. A shadow appeared at the far end of the hallway. Then another. Then another. 3 figures, one dressed in blue and red, one wearing the remains of a broken containment collar, and one wrapped in a tattered American flag. The executive's face went white, because Superman wasn't the one who frightened him most. It was Homelander, the man he had spent years manipulating, the man who finally knew the truth. And judging by the look in his eyes, Vought had just run out of time. Vought had just run out of time. The executive stumbled backward. His confidence vanished instantly. Years of authority, years of privilege, years of believing he was untouchable. Gone. Because standing in front of him were the 3 people Vought feared most. Superman, Daniel, and Homelander. The corridor suddenly felt very small. The executive forced a smile. A terrible mistake. Now let's all just calm. Homelander crossed the distance before he could finish the sentence. The man found himself lifted several feet off the ground. His expensive shoes dangled helplessly. 43 children. Homelander's voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. The executive began sweating immediately. We can explain. Homelander tightened his grip. No. The word echoed through the corridor. You can open the doors. For once, nobody needed Superman to intervene, because Clark could hear it. Homelander wasn't losing control. He was controlling it. That was new. Very new. The executive's pulse exploded with panic. They'll destroy me. Daniel stepped forward. His expression hardened. Good. The answer ended the argument. Within seconds, the executive entered the security codes. Massive containment doors began opening throughout the underground complex. One after another. One after another. One after another. Then the heartbeats started moving. 43 frightened children. 43 hidden lives. Finally free. Clark moved immediately, meeting them, reassuring them, helping them understand they were safe. Some cried, some froze, some simply stared, not believing it. Years of captivity had taught them hope was dangerous. It would take time to undo that. Nearby, Daniel stood motionless, watching. His eyes glistened, because he recognized the look on their faces. He had worn it himself once, a very long time ago. Ryan arrived minutes later with the others. The moment the children saw someone their own age, the atmosphere changed. Fear began giving way to curiosity, then relief, then something even better, laughter. Small at first, then more. The sound echoed through corridors that had never been built for happiness. Clark smiled. That sound alone made the entire journey worth it. Suddenly, every monitor inside the facility activated simultaneously. Stillwell. Live. Every screen, every hallway, every room. She looked tired, older somehow. The mask was finally cracking. You think you've won? Nobody responded. Stillwell continued. Vought built modern civilization. Daniel laughed. Homelander rolled his eyes. Clark simply listened. Without us, the world will descend into chaos. Now Homelander finally spoke. No. The answer surprised everyone, including Stillwell. He stepped toward the nearest screen. For the first time in his life, there was no script, no corporation, no audience management, just honesty. You needed us afraid. The corridor fell silent. Homelander looked directly into the camera. And I'm done being afraid of you. Somewhere inside Vought Tower, executives began running, because they understood what had just happened. The company's greatest weapon had turned against them. Stillwell's expression hardened. Then unexpectedly she smiled, a strange smile, almost relieved. You really don't know, do you? Clark immediately focused. Something about her heartbeat changed. Confidence, not fear. Confidence. Homelander noticed too. Know what? Stillwell looked directly at Superman, then at Homelander, then at Daniel. You think this ends with Vought? The smile widened. It doesn't. Deep beneath the facility, something enormous activated. The floor trembled. Emergency lights exploded to life. Daniel's expression changed instantly. Fear. Real fear. The kind Clark had only heard once before, when the collar broke. Daniel looked toward the lowest levels of the complex, then whispered a single word. No. Clark turned toward him. What is it? Daniel's face had gone completely pale, because whatever Vought had buried beneath the tower, even Asset Zero was afraid of it. Vought had just run out of time. The executive stumbled backward. His confidence vanished instantly. Years of authority, years of privilege, years of believing he was untouchable. Gone. Because standing in front of him were the three people Vought feared most. Superman, Daniel, and Homelander. The corridor suddenly felt very small. The executive forced a smile. A terrible mistake. Now let's all just calm. Homelander crossed the distance before he could finish the sentence. The man found himself lifted several feet off the ground. His expensive shoes dangled helplessly. 43 children. Homelander's voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. The executive began sweating immediately. We can explain. Homelander tightened his grip. No. The word echoed through the corridor. You can open the doors. For once, nobody needed Superman to intervene, because Clark could hear it. Homelander wasn't losing control. He was controlling it. That was new. Very new. The executive's pulse exploded with panic. They'll destroy me. Daniel stepped forward. His expression hardened. Good. The answer ended the argument. Within seconds, the executive entered the security codes. Massive containment doors began opening throughout the underground complex. One after another. One after another. One after another. Then the heartbeats started moving. 43 frightened children. 43 hidden lives. Finally free. Clark moved immediately, meeting them, reassuring them, helping them understand they were safe. Some cried, some froze, some simply stared, not believing it. Years of captivity had taught them hope was dangerous. It would take time to undo that. Nearby, Daniel stood motionless, watching. His eyes glistened, because he recognized the look on their faces. He had worn it himself once, a very long time ago. Ryan arrived minutes later with the others. The moment the children saw someone their own age, the atmosphere changed. Fear began giving way to curiosity, then relief, then something even better. Laughter. Small at first, then more. The sound echoed through corridors that had never been built for happiness. Clark smiled. That sound alone made the entire journey worth it. Suddenly, every monitor inside the facility activated simultaneously. Stillwell. Live. Every screen, every hallway, every room. She looked tired, older somehow. The mask was finally cracking. You think you've won. Nobody responded. Stillwell continued. Vought built modern civilization. Daniel laughed. Homelander rolled his eyes. Clark simply listened. Without us, the world will descend into chaos. Now Homelander finally spoke. No. The answer surprised everyone, including Stillwell. He stepped toward the nearest screen. For the first time in his life, there was no script, no corporation, no audience management, just honesty. You needed us afraid. The corridor fell silent. Homelander looked directly into the camera. And I'm done being afraid of you. Somewhere inside Vought Tower, executives began running, because they understood what had just happened. The company's greatest weapon had turned against them. Stillwell's expression hardened. Then unexpectedly she smiled, a strange smile, almost relieved. You really don't know, do you? Clark immediately focused. Something about her heartbeat changed. Confidence, not fear. Confidence. Homelander noticed too. Know what? Stillwell looked directly at Superman, then at Homelander, then at Daniel. You think this ends with Vought? The smile widened. It doesn't. Deep beneath the facility, something enormous activated. The floor trembled. Emergency lights exploded to life. Daniel's expression changed instantly. Fear. Real fear. The kind Clark had only heard once before, when the collar broke. Daniel looked toward the lowest levels of the complex, then whispered a single word. No. Clark turned toward him. What is it? Daniel's face had gone completely pale, because whatever Vought had buried beneath the tower, even Asset Zero was afraid of it. Homelander was finally ready to fight. The realization hit Clark instantly, not because of the heat vision building behind his eyes, not because of the tremors spreading through the tower, because he could hear it, the pain, years of it, decades, every lie, every manipulation, every moment spent believing he would finally earn love if he was strong enough, important enough, perfect enough. The tragedy was that he had never been given a chance. Homelander. Clark's voice remained calm, steady, but the other man wasn't listening anymore. The tower exploded outward. Glass shattered across multiple floors. News helicopters swerved away in panic. Government agents scattered below. A red beam erupted from Homelander's eyes. Not aimed at Superman, at the building, at Vought, at everything. Clark moved instantly. The heat vision carved through support structures. Superman intercepted the blast before it reached occupied sections of the tower. The impact illuminated the skyline. For a moment, Manhattan looked like daylight. The world watched live. Millions, then billions. The strongest man in their world attacking the empire that created him. Homelander rose into the sky. The shockwaves shattered windows for blocks. His cape whipped violently in the wind. His eyes glowed like furnaces. You don't understand. The roar echoed across the city. Clark followed him upward. high above Manhattan, high above the helicopters, high above the terrified crowds below. For a moment they hovered in silence, the same way they had on that rooftop months earlier, only now there was nowhere left to hide. "No," Clark said softly. "I do." Homelander laughed, a broken sound. "You had parents." The words hit harder than any punch. "You had a home." His voice cracked. "You had people who loved you." For the first time, Clark didn't respond immediately, because Homelander was right. "I had a lab." The city trembled as another burst of heat vision erupted. Clark absorbed it without moving, just as he had on that rooftop. The same impossible sight, the same impossible gap. And somehow that made Homelander even angrier. "I had a lab!" The scream rolled across Manhattan. Every helicopter heard it. Every camera recorded it. Every person watching felt it. Not rage, pain, pure pain. Then Homelander attacked, for real. The first punch landed like a missile. The clouds split apart. A sonic boom rattled the harbor. The second strike followed instantly. Then a third. Then a fourth. A barrage powerful enough to level buildings. Clark blocked them all. Not effortlessly, but calmly, defensively, never striking back, never escalating. The contrast became obvious. One man was fighting to hurt. The other was fighting to protect. The difference mattered. Homelander accelerated, breaking the sound barrier, then doubling it, then tripling it. He hit Superman with everything he had. Years of frustration, years of loneliness, years of hate. The city watched, the world watched, and Superman still refused to retaliate. Finally, Homelander stopped, hovering, breathing hard, staring, confused, furious, because he was beginning to understand something terrifying. Clark wasn't winning. Clark wasn't even fighting, and that meant something far worse. The rooftop had not been a fluke. The gap between them was real. Always had been. Always would be. For the first time, fear returned to Homelander's eyes. The same fear Superman had seen on that rainy rooftop months ago, when the heat vision failed, when the illusion cracked, when everything began. And this time there was nowhere left to run. The city disappeared beneath them. The clouds drifted around them. The winds screamed across the sky. Yet for a moment, neither man moved. Homelander stared, trying to understand, trying to find the trick. There had to be one. There always was. Nobody could be this strong. Nobody could be this calm. Nobody could be this good. Why? The question escaped him before he could stop it. Clark looked at him. Why what? Why are you better than me? The words hung in the air, raw, honest. For the first time since they met, there was no performance, no mask, no Homelander, only John, the frightened child from the laboratory. Clark's expression softened. "I'm not." The answer immediately angered him. "Don't!" Homelander's eyes glowed again. "Don't lie to me." "I'm not lying." The world watched. Billions of people. Every camera, every screen, every satellite feed. Superman looked directly at him. "The difference isn't power." Homelander laughed bitterly. "Then what is it?" For a moment, Clark thought about Smallville, about Jonathan Kent, about Martha, about the lessons that shaped him, about every choice that followed. Then he answered. Choice. The word landed harder than any punch. "You think you're better because you choose?" "No," Clark shook his head. "I think every day matters." Homelander stared, confused, angry, desperate. Clark continued. "Every day I choose what kind of person I want to be." The city below seemed very far away. "I wasn't born a hero." Homelander blinked. "Neither was I." The sentence never left Clark's mouth. It didn't need to. Both men understood it. Then Homelander attacked. Not out of strategy, not out of confidence, out of pain. He accelerated faster than ever before. The shockwave split clouds for miles. His fist collided with Superman's jaw. Then another. Then another. Heat vision erupted. The sky turned red. The ocean below boiled where stray beams struck the water. Every ounce of power, every ounce of rage, everything he had. Clark finally moved. Not to attack, to stop him. The next punch never landed. Superman's hand closed around Homelander's wrist. Effortlessly, the world went silent. Homelander pulled. Nothing happened. He pulled harder. Nothing. For the first time in his life, his greatest strength meant absolutely nothing. Fear returned. Not fear of death, fear of truth. Clark looked directly into his eyes, the same eyes that had terrified an entire world. "I know what they did to you." Homelander froze. "I know they hurt you." The anger faltered, just slightly. "I know they lied to you." The glow behind Homelander's eyes weakened. "And I know none of it was your fault." The words hit harder than any attack could have. For a moment, neither moved. Then Homelander's voice cracked. Just once. "They made me this." Clark nodded. "Yes." The answer surprised him. No argument, no denial, just truth. They did. Tears mixed with anger, with grief, with decades of loneliness, everything finally breaking at once. But what happens next? Clark's grip loosened. "That's your choice." The words echoed across the sky, across the city, across the world. For several seconds, Homelander simply hovered there, broken, exhausted, no longer fighting Superman, fighting himself. And for the first time in his entire life, he stopped. And for the first time in his entire life, he stopped. The silence felt impossible. No explosions, no heat vision, no shockwaves, just wind. The endless wind high above Manhattan. Below them, the city watched. Billions of eyes across the world watched, waiting, expecting Superman to finish it, expecting a final blow, expecting victory. Instead, Superman simply let go. Homelander stared at him, confused. "You could have beaten me." Clark smiled slightly. "I know." The answer hurt, not because it was arrogant, because it was true. Homelander looked away, toward the city, toward the people he had spent his entire life trying to impress. Then toward Vought Tower, the building that had shaped him, controlled him, broken him. Below, Ryan stood on the rooftop with Daniel and the others, watching, waiting. For the first time, Homelander noticed something strange. Ryan wasn't afraid, not anymore. The realization hit him harder than any punch. Fear wasn't what the boy wanted. It never had been. Ryan wanted trust. The same thing Homelander had wanted his entire life. A single tear escaped before he could stop it. The cameras captured everything. The world saw it. The mighty Homelander, the living God, crying. Yet nobody laughed. Nobody cheered. Because for the first time, they weren't looking at a monster. They were looking at a damaged human being. Far below, government helicopters surrounded Vought Tower. Arrest teams flooded the building. Executives surrendered. Lawyers vanished. Evidence poured into federal custody. The empire was over. Daniel stepped forward on the rooftop. The morning sunlight illuminated the scars around his neck where the collar had once rested. For the first time in decades, he looked free. Ryan smiled at him. Daniel smiled back. Simple, normal, human. The thing Vought had tried hardest to take away. High above them, Clark looked toward the sky. The familiar energy appeared moments later. A ripple, a fracture, a glowing tear between worlds. The multiversal rift. Home. It had finally returned. Clark looked down at Manhattan one last time. The city was still flawed, still imperfect, still wounded, but it had hope again. That was enough. He descended slowly to the rooftop. Ryan was the first to approach. "You have to go." Clark nodded. Ryan looked disappointed, then smiled. Thank you. Clark placed a hand on his shoulder. You already know what kind of man you want to be. Ryan glanced toward Homelander, then back to Superman, and nodded. Across the rooftop, Homelander approached. No cameras, no speeches, no audience, just two men. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Homelander extended his hand, the same hand that had terrified nations, the same hand that had destroyed lives. Clark shook it, without hesitation, without fear. Homelander lowered his eyes. Do you think I can fix any of it? Clark thought for a moment, then answered honestly, not all of it. The answer wasn't comforting. It wasn't supposed to be. But you can start. For a long moment, Homelander said nothing. Then he nodded, just once. It was enough. Clark turned toward the rift. The wind intensified. The light grew brighter. The moment had arrived. He looked back one final time, at Ryan, at Daniel, at the children, at a world that had forgotten what heroes look like, and then remembered. With a smile, Superman rose into the sky. The light engulfed him. The rift closed, and he was gone. For several seconds, nobody moved. The city remained silent. Then Ryan looked toward the horizon. The sun was fully risen now. A new day, a better day, a day that finally belonged to them. And somewhere, in another universe, a man in a red cape flew home knowing that hope had survived. The end.